Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our virtual session today, Toxic Docs and a People's EPA, Advancing Environmental and Climate Justice through Interdisciplinary Research and Open Access Initiatives. I'm Adrienne Lim, Dean of Libraries at the University of Maryland, and I'm very happy to host this event in honor of International Open Access Week. We're very glad you've joined us. As we settle in for an interesting 90 minutes or so ahead of us, please note that we are recording this event and we will be making it available for later viewing. During the discussion portion of this session, we will be using the Q&A function in Zoom to address any questions or comments that you might have that you wish to submit to our panelists. We'll wait until the end of all remarks to address any questions. International Open Access Week is a very important and special time in our community where we can learn about the potential benefits of open access and help inspire wider participation in helping to make open access a new norm in scholarship and research. I really think today's session will prove to be one of those inspirational events because we will hear from two distinguished colleagues as they discuss their own fascinating interdisciplinary research in the intersections of environmental history, public health history, and industrial pollution, and the ways in which their research both relies upon and generates open access information. At UMD, about 2 years ago, we started a group called UMD Pact to focus on open, equitable access to knowledge, open research, open science, open government, open educational resources. And this session today is one part of UMD Pact's efforts to advance the open movement. Please visit our website at pact.umd.edu to learn more about our work. In addition to the libraries and UMD Pact support, this event today was co-sponsored by the UMD School of Architecture, Planning, and Preservation. Sincere thanks to Dean Dawn Jordan and the School of Architecture, Planning, and Preservation for their partnership and support. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our moderator today, Dr. Philip Cohen, who will introduce our panelists. Dr. Philip Cohen is a professor of sociology and a demographer at the University of Maryland, College Park, where his research and teaching concern families and inequality. The founding director of Soc Archive, an open archive for the social sciences, and an advocate for open science in the research community, Dr. Cohen writes about demographic trends, family structure, the division of labor, health disparities, and open science. He is the author of a popular textbook, The Family, Diversity, Inequality, and Social Change, now in its 3rd edition. Thank you, Philip Cohen, for being our moderator today, and I will turn the mic over to you.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much, Dean Lim. Let me just take a moment to express appreciation for your leadership and Pact and on these issues on our campus and putting this event together for our campus and OA week. So much appreciated, and thanks for the invitation to participate. It's a great pleasure for me too. So we have two speakers. Each one is going to talk to us for 15 or 20 minutes. Then they'll have an opportunity to ask each other any questions or make comments, and then we'll turn to your questions and comments after that. So I have a very light touch as moderator, I hope. I'll just be handling the transitions and keeping an eye on things. And I'll introduce our speakers at the beginning. First will be Dr. Jessica Varner. She's a historian, architect, activist.
I think I don't know. Do you have this? There's just this little where you can change the attendee view.
Someone's not muted. Sorry. Okay, Jessica. I thought that was for me. I thought I was doing something wrong. I hope I'm not. Yes, Jessica Varner, historian, architect, activist, postdoctoral fellow. She's the co-curator on a People's EPA project and the co-editor of the Aggregate Toxics Project, and co-PI on the NSF STS funded project on cumulative exposure. Her new book coming out is Chemical Desires When the Chemical Industry Met Modern Architecture, 1870 to 1970. She will go first. Our second speaker will be Dr. Merlin Chowkwanyun, who is an assistant professor of sociomedical sciences at Columbia University. And his new book forthcoming is All Health Politics is Local, Community Battles for Medical Care and Environmental Health, to be published by UNC Press. He is the PI in a recent NSF grant for toxicdocs.org, which is a depository of once secret documents on industrial poisons. So you can see why we brought these two interesting and dynamic speakers and researchers together, and I'll turn it over to them in order. Dr. Varner, then Dr. Chowkwanyun, and then we'll have your comments after that. So with no further ado, Dr. Varner, thank you.
Thanks so much, Philip. Let me share my screen. One sec. Can you all see that?
Yep, looks good.
Great, thanks so much. Sorry, it's hard to see with the screen. So first, let me offer my deep gratitude for those that made this event possible. Dr. Adrienne Lim, who reached out many months ago after someone recommended my work, I assume via the Birdside Twitter, and who instantly understood why a People's EPA and Toxic Docs project were important to International Open Access Week and the University of Maryland's celebration of it. And to Judith Kidd, who's in here somewhere, who managed the DocuSign requests and doodle polls, I think it's good to make labor transparent. And Dr. Philip Cohen, thank you so much, who generously agreed to join in and shepherd this conversation, who also advocates for public-facing scholarship, as was mentioned. And I look forward to reading your book in the future, coming out, I'm not sure when, but Citizen Scholar looks great. And finally, to my co-conversation colleague, Merlin, and the Toxic Docs project, which really serves as a key archive in my own forthcoming manuscript, Chemical Desires. So the overlap is really apparent. I'm indebted to his group's activism and advocacy for accessible litigation findings and corporate memos that really allow scholars like myself to see beyond the curtain to the inner workings of the chemical industry, bringing light to corporate behavior purposely meant to exist in the shadows. My research questions are forever changed because I can ask different questions, not about did they know, talking about corporations, but when, how, who, and why, with really the evidence to back it up. So let me quick introduce myself and provide a quick overview of what I'm going to talk about. So as discussed, I'm Jessica Varner. I'm a historian of architecture, material culture, technology, and environmental history. And I teach courses in environmental history, material culture courses, and interdisciplinary engaged method research around human and environmental health while finishing my book. So in 2020, as I was finishing my dissertation at MIT, I got involved in a nonprofit group, EDGY, and I'll explain what that is next. I'll just use the moniker EDGY for now. And at EDGY, I co-founded a People's EPA with Leek Fredrickson, a public historian with me, and it's a public history of the Environmental Protection Agency. So today I'll talk a little bit about EDGY, its watchdog ways, and why a public history of the EPA and access to it matters. So I work collectively with collaborators at the Environmental Data and Governance Initiative, also known as EDGY. And let me pause here because I'm going to give you a quick overview of what EDGY is. EDGY started when a group of folks met over a simple emergency email with a long CC'd list in November of 2016. Now, if you recall, in 2016, it was an election month, and the Trump administration was set to enter the White House. The group saw crucial environmental regulations possibly under attack and were warned that critical information was going to be set and sunset online. And so much of our knowledge is really about the world comes from the web and digital sources. So EDGY saw an opportunity to become a watchdog for environmental information and its transparency. So this amazing network of historians, scientists, data analysts, activists, advocates, and more are organized into working groups to get things done, to make sure that environmental data is transparent and provide history and context to why environmental data matters. We work under themes such as environmental data justice, environmental enforcement watch, website monitoring, environmental historians action collaborative, and policy and interviewing. And these are all work groups at EDGI who work together. So what things do we get done? So for example, EDGI's website monitoring group has been tracking in government website changes, scrutinizing tens of thousands of federal agency environmental web pages since 2016. They chronicled the moves of the Trump administration as words like climate change were deleted from government websites. And this is showing just one of their reports from summer 2016 to summer 2020 to see how climate change actually was taken off the government EPA's website. In another group, the Environmental Enforcement Watch, EDGI members also create tools to visualize EPA data. Like this example in a recent workshop with my colleagues Eric Nost and Kelsey Brezeman, they showed how this tool, they developed the Watershed Notebook, and forgive me if I get anything wrong, this is their work group, but I really love to talk about EDGI's work. So they use federal data, such as the Clean Water Act's enforcement, violations, and inspection data from the EPA's Enforcement and Compliance History Online, otherwise known as ECHO database. Their tool allows folks to ask questions about how environmental protection laws are working to protect human health in watersheds. For example, they ask, are local industries reporting putting benzene into the water? How much and where? And as shown in this tool output, looking at the Niagara River and Lake Erie watershed and beyond. So, and now almost 6 years later, our 50-member active network with extended 300-person Slack body, and if you know Slack, it's a lot of folks, we come from multiple academic institutions, nonprofit and grassroots organizations and professions to document, analyze, and advocate for better environmental data and governance. And we work together to improve environmental information stewardship, promote environmental democracy, health, and justice in the digital age. And while Trump's administration was really the catalyst, our watchdog ways run deep as we continue to monitor, advocate, and act for more environmental transparency and data justice as Biden's administration really shifts words, resources, and agency methods. So after more than 2 years at EDGI, I currently help organize the overall org with other folks in the Open Coordinating Committee, and I'm part of the Policy and Interviewing Working Group, a group that analyzes changes to federal institutions and environmental, energy, and climate policies in various projects. So we work in-depth reports, white papers, public comments, op-eds, fact sheets, letters to Congress, FOIA requests, websites, such as the one I'll show you today, public histories of environmental governance, and my biggest project, which I'm now going to go into depth, a People's EPA, or APE, the moniker. So this shows a little bit about the design, which was done by this amazing graphic design firm, which is a riff on the Serge and Chimaev graphic design of the 1977 EPA, when EPA was really coming into a moment of power, and they used this graphic design, which is a corporate design firm who also did logos such as Pan Am and Coca-Cola. And so our website design takes a little bit of riff on that. So in December 2020, EDGI launched a People's EPA, a collaborative digital project to tell the complex public history of the Environmental Protection Agency and really help illuminate a path forward. So this was a moment when the Biden administration was outwardly proclaiming that they would restore and rebuild the EPA. And we wanted to make sure that they were really held accountable. But we also saw a need for folks to understand what a complex agency like the EPA does. So a People's EPA is a website first and foremost. And in other ways, it's really a counter archive to the agency for everyone, the public, students, activists, journalists, to really understand the Environmental Protection Agency's national and global importance. So since its creation, the agency in 1970 Congress has really charged the agency with implementing laws that protect us from air pollution, dirty water, and hazardous waste, among other things. And this process is really complex. So our website provides a straightforward history of the agency, explains how it operates, and provides the data and tools for you to explore and track the EPA in greater depth. So what are some of these tools? So since December 2020, APE has slowly released previously anonymous interview transcripts and recordings from the past 4 years. And it's still counting those interviews. We're still making more. As EDGI interviewers and collaborators conducted over 150 conversations with 90 EPA and environmentally related employees and retirees. A majority are or were career employees, and they worked in various headquarter offices, divisions, and programs from enforcement and compliance, air, environmental justice, and beyond. The interviews reveal the nitty-gritty bureaucracy at the EPA, and I sort of go into an animation and show you what's there. They go into this nitty-gritty bureaucracy. When computers aren't updated, when political office disagreements happen, and how EPA workers understand their jobs day in and day out. The interviews also explain how rules are made, how enforcement can often be weak, how toxics are regulated molecule by molecule, how the Trump administration's impact affected morale within offices, and even how the EPA started. As APE and EDGI collaborator Chris Sellers notes, one of my collaborators, the interviews aren't just an indictment of the Trump admin's attack on science and environmental regulation at a moment when we really started the interview process. They also make up a library of lessons learned over the course of the EPA's history. And so in these folders or archive, we provide a little abstract for each interviewee, a full transcript of audio, a full written transcript, and related keyword and tags. So ways to get accessibly into the information. And these are some of the keywords. So if you go on the back end of the page, if you know nothing about the EPA, but you're interested in, say, Congress, you can click and you get a whole, basically personalized file folders of everything that we've tagged related to Congress and the EPA. So the Growing Archive provides audio, full transcripts with footnoted information, keyword definitions explaining some of the agency's primary historical figures, agency divisions, key laws, and more. One sec. But the APA also recognizes that the EPA is making changes daily that affect human health and human and environmental health. So the AP website is also tracking the headlines daily related to the EPA, found in local and national media. Imagine a running history in the making of EPA's moves each day. The feed understands that the EPA's history is a two-sided history. We look at the national and the regional. So it shows both how Nebraska reporters might focus on ethanol standards, while national media picks up larger revisions to the Toxic Substance Control Act. Seeing headlines over time stacked up together allows folks to see the bigger trends, but also see the bubbling up of EPA changes as they aggregate into larger actions, such as the most recent focus in the EPA under Michael Regan's leadership, and the big shift towards environmental justice and actions such as the Justice 40. We also provide other tools. We provide timelines that look at specific themes within the EPA. So here in a timeline provided about climate change and the EPA, there's key points at which we've documented alongside of primary material that allow you to understand how climate change and the EPA, how the EPA might have either dealt with or tried not to deal with the issues of climate change over the agency's history. We also provide graphs and data analytic tools, such as this example about cleanup costs and compliance at the EPA. So this data looks specifically at how compliance, which is the dark green, The light green, which is super fun cleanup, and supplemented projects have changed from 1990s to 2020. And you can see almost the pulse of each administration having different resources, putting different money towards different, so you can sort of see, if you look very closely, how the Obama administration really, compliance cost really went up, and super fun, sort of the pulse became a little bit larger. So these analytics allow for folks that are using the website to actually dig deeper into the real numbers and the real nitty-gritty of the EPA. We also track those who are tracking Biden. So there's lots of efforts currently as the EPA is being restored. And who are the folks that are really looking and advocating for Biden to restore the EPA in those efforts? Not just restore, but also rebuild and make anew. And so there is all the folks and advocates, grassroots groups, but also larger experts who are looking into making Biden's EPA stronger. So APE is not a static thing. We're actually growing and changing, trying to make environmental protection information more accessible. So we're doing efforts to actually start to begin to map certain areas, certain regions from Texas, Alaska, Montana, the places where we live. We're beginning to actually think about how the EPA touches the ground in local jurisdictions, and asking communities what they want to know about the EPA and what information is important to them as they make decisions within environmental justice and climate activism, how the EPA can actually change the neighborhood where you live. We're also working towards, and this is something that I'm incredibly passionate about making multilingual access within the EPA documents. Currently, there's minimal documents that are made public for a larger language audience. And a lot of the neighborhoods where these documents are really important do not have translations available. So that is one more of our initiatives. And then also moving beyond to think about how environmental knowledge can be met on the ground. And as APE grows, APE is not a stagnant website. It is something that it's an archive repository that it's growing over time. So as we work on these initiatives, such as the new Cumulative Impacts Project, as we work to grow and learn what folks need, APE remains a non-stagnant website growing to try to provide an archive for a people's EPA. So that said, that's sort of an overview of what the project is. If anyone has any questions, we're also looking for feedback. So as you dig into a people's EPA, email, follow Twitter, see what EDGI is doing. We're also a volunteer network. So please get into contact if any of this is interesting. And as you dig in, what works, what doesn't, we are an open ear to try to make the EPA more transparent and advocate for better policies going forward. And we're always happy to have your voice in the mix. So thank you for your time today.
Great. Wonderful. Thank you very much, Dr. Varner. We will turn it over now to Dr. Chowkwanyun, who will give his 15-20 minutes, and then we'll open up the discussion. So with no further ado, take it away.
Yeah, thank you. This is the point in every Zoom presenter's presentation where they got to load the PowerPoint. A little bit suspenseful, but I think we've done this enough that it shouldn't be too difficult. Let me just make sure. Yeah, it's PowerPoint and share. Slideshow, play from the start. Yeah. Do folks see this PowerPoint?
Yep, looks good.
Terrific, thank you. Thank you, Phil, and I also want to thank Adrian Lim and Judith Kidd for putting this on and managing a lot of the behind the scenes stuff to make this happen. I run a seminar series here, and I know when you do the Zoom ones, it's often actually even more work because you have to manage this IT component on top of the usual scheduling stuff too. So thank you very much. And I also want to thank my co-panelist, Jessica Varner, someone I admire quite a bit. We've interacted quite a bit also digitally, but never in real life, though. So I hope we can do that soon, though, what is real life anyway these days in this digital age? I should also say I'll say a little bit more about this towards the end, but these two projects are actually linked and the links are getting stronger as well. So I think it's especially nice that we're both here together. All right, let me start. I have about 20 minutes. I want to be tight. I want to first just broadly situate the project in a slightly broader landscape, and particularly this field called civic tech, which again, broadly speaking, is about leveraging all these various advances in information technology and data science for the good. And I think this term is actually a very useful reframing of the larger debate on technology and society, because you more often than not read about very dystopian and terrible things that this stuff is used for. We're in no short of examples of technology doing a lot of very bad things, tech executives acting irresponsibly, even sociopathically, firms suppressing information about being hacked, companies openly compromising their customers' privacy by collaborating with defense agencies, others condoning until very recently what many of us might call hate speech, technology being used in deportation, algorithms that unintentionally commit racial discrimination. And more recently, as the Facebook whistleblower scandal showed, speaking of internal documents that came to public light, attempts to cultivate addiction, especially in young people, and then scuttle evidence of it. And, so these days, it's not very hard to marshal kind of a larger indictment of this entire tech sector that is transformed for better or for worse all of our lives. And I agree with that indictment and find myself often participating in it. But I think one of the potential drawbacks of that critique characterizing the entire conversation on technology and society is that you often miss some potential for this technology to contribute to the civic good. And I think Jessica showed some of the tools that the People's EPA site has done to enhance public understanding of the EPA and also keep it accountable. And so Toxic Docs, which I'm going to talk about right now, is another attempt to do that. So Toxic Docs, it stands for not doctors, but toxic documents. There are certainly toxic doctors out there, and they should have websites dedicated to them, but that's not what this is. This is documents. And so what is a toxic document? I'll answer that by setting the scene with this photo from the 1990s. So this is an infamous 1994 federal congressional hearing where 7 tobacco executives infamously declared, quote, "I believe nicotine is not addictive." And we now know that this was just blatantly false. And what followed from this hearing was a historic and very successful class action lawsuit. And that lawsuit rested on evidence that was sitting in the tobacco industry's vaults, documents that had just been sitting in attics and storage closets for decades, but that federal courts ordered open, and state courts too ordered open when these various cases moved forward. So when that happens, that's part of what's called a discovery process. The discovery process, where both sides in a case have to basically show data that can be used to adjudicate the case. And so discovery is great on one hand because it yields this absolute trove of never before seen documents that come to public view for the first time. And these ones proved over and over again that the industry not only had long known about the addictive qualities of cigarettes, but was also actively trying to increase the addictive quality of this product. So tobacco has had an impact beyond just the world of smoking cessation, these tobacco suits, I mean. It's also provided a framework for similar legal actions around leaded gasoline and paint, silica dust in mines, PCBs, benzene, asbestos, polyvinyl chloride, among many others. And Again, as in tobacco, the lawsuits over these substances have just unleashed a trove via the discovery process of never before seen data, just millions of pages of documents about the inner workings of the corporations that produced these substances. And as I say, on one hand, this is great. It's very exciting when you're a historian or you're an epidemiologist or a policy analyst or an economist or a sociologist. You're always on the lookout for data. And this is good data to kind of write about how these products came to be and how they penetrate all of our bodies. But there are also challenges to working with these documents, namely just the sheer volume. That's kind of the first and most overarching one of the problems. And so our goal is quite simple. It's to answer a simple kind of methods question in a way. It's how do you even begin to sort through millions of documents like this, many of which are just kind of completely organized about various toxic substances in the 20th and 21st century. So I'll walk you through one way we tackled that question when this project began maybe 4 or 5 years ago or so. So we received, when I was first putzing around this stuff, we received about 1 terabyte, that's 1,000 gigabytes of documents that had come out of cases filed against Dow Chemical, Monsanto, DuPont, and many other firms. And this was particularly over the carcinogenic qualities of polyvinyl chloride, which is in a lot of various plastics and so forth. And we're very excited to receive this material, but the initial excitement quickly subsided when we realized what it meant to process this much material. So it was about 250,000 documents total, about 4 million pages. Now, most of them did arrive to us, thankfully, in a digital form. But the problem, though, is that they were just scanned images. They were a complete mess. They were not machine readable. So that is, to a computer, a document like this one on the left was just another picture, another image. It was no different from another picture or another image of someone like San Antonio Spurs coach Greg Popovich. The number 1 in that document on the left was just a line, a picture of a line, indistinguishable from, an actual line. So in order to work with these documents and do the things that I think researchers would want to use these for, like full text searches and stuff like that, we had to first use optical character recognition, or OCR technology, to get the computer to recognize letters as actual letters, numbers as actual numbers, the letter S as the actual letter S and not just, a couple of curves, and so on and so forth. Well, OCR is not innovative at all. It has actually been around for like 25 years. So initially we said, no sweat. We'll just feed this stuff into standard off-the-shelf commercial software that we have on our laptops, stuff like Adobe Acrobat Pro, which all of us have probably used at some point. But by our back of the envelope calculation, as we started OCRing this stuff, one by one on laptops like this would have taken at least 6 months to finish. And that's assuming no crashes and things like that, which usually happen when you're trying to OCR 4 million pages on kind of just a kind of run-of-the-mill consumer laptop. So we had to look for another solution, and we found one at this thing called the Open Science Grid. So this is a consortium of research universities that pool together their computing power nationally. And what it does is it essentially allows you to harness the power of thousands of supercomputers across the country onto a single task. And so, I went over to the Open Science Grid people and I said, hey, can we do this, but for OCR? For OCRing a bunch of documents? Can that be our single task? I mean, they're normally in the business of medical imaging and astrophysics and things like that, but it seemed to, I wondered whether you could use pooled computing power on a task like this, even if it was an unusual task for them. And they said, we don't see why not. And so what we did was we fed all of these non-OCR'd files into the Open Science Grid, that is just pictures of documents. And then using this open source utility, speaking of open access, it's called HT Condor. It was developed at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. What we did was we distributed our 4 million pages, our 250,000 documents across the grid accordingly. So we had some documents being processed, at Indiana, others at Baylor, others at MIT, etc. And HT Condor is a utility that basically oversees the division of labor. And so it sends the stuff out, it returns it back to the central node when done. All told, for this task, I think we used about 4,000 servers at the same time. We, again, sent them out, got them back, reassembled them. Total time for 4 million pages on a laptop, you'll recall, was 6 months. Total time on a grid like this, 4,000 servers, only a day. And so this is a pretty big reason why the project just wouldn't have been feasible 20 years ago. It would have taken a lot of time. It would have been cost prohibitive to buy a bunch of computers myself and then rig them together, or just wait for this glacial OCR process to slowly work on each of them. But nowadays, the computers themselves are a lot faster, and the innovation is there to have them do these kinds of distributed tasks. So I'm not scared if I get 1 million pages thrown at me, whereas I would have been very scared if you had talked to me in the year 2000. And there's a lot of similar innovation in the private sector as well, with very affordable cloud computing from Microsoft, Google, Amazon, etc. I can call up right now 1,000 servers if I need to for a short 2-hour intensive task and actually not pay that much money to do so. And we sometimes do that as well. Okay, but the challenges don't just end there. Now that we have machine readable text that people can do full text searches in and so forth, we get to another problem, which is how do you actually find stuff in these pages? And the most obvious is, as I say, the full text search and some advanced search filters that we have on our website, which allow you to sort by corporation and toxic substances and particular toxic substances and dates and things like that. And this was really the heart of the 1.0 version of Toxic Docs. We were able to become the world's largest database of once secret documents on all those things that I talked about. And we've also been acquiring additional material on things like dioxin and PFAS and other stuff that wasn't initially in the data set when we first started. I think one way to convey what's useful about these documents is actually to just show very quickly some of the scholarship that's come out of it. So just recently, in a recent issue of the American Journal of Public Health, Sadie Bergen, a doctoral student of mine, used Toxic Docs to write about Firestone plastics, and she used behind the scenes documents to show how Firestone invoked fetal protection laws to circumvent gender equity laws. They argued that women couldn't work in their factories because the factories were uniquely harmful to their reproductive health. Again, a rather cynical argument. We know that's not true now, and that men also suffer from reproductive health problems rooted in unsafe workplace. But she was kind of able to kind of piece together what the backdoor deliberations were on the cynical invocation of these kinds of laws, gender equity laws and workplace safety laws. A legal scholar on the right used Toxic Docs to find material on Clarence Thomas's employment as a lawyer for Monsanto, which did some clues on his environmental jurisprudence. A doctoral student at Harvard used the database to write about the OECD's chemical testing standards and how they were influenced by private testing firms. Some colleagues of mine and I used the database to show how the FDA's asbestos standards in talcum products were undermined by pressures from asbestos trade associations. We've also seen a couple of books that used material in the documents, along with PBS documentaries. And recently, actually, just this past week, ProPublica and NPR did a story on the EPA's failure to fully regulate asbestos due to industry pressure, again, using some of the material in the database. So pretty cool, I think. But I also think we can do more. And so now what I want to do is go through some of the text analytics tools that we're rolling out for what we're calling Toxic Docs 2.0. And we recently just found out that the database has been funded again by the NSF in part to develop some of these. So one of these tools is actually up right now in very rough form at this address, toxicdocs.tools. I actually think we have to update our security certificate for it. So you can go there now. You may get some weird message from your browser, but you can just ignore it and use the site. But the one tool that we have up there now is called a named entity extractor. So we're very interested in finding out who the major personalities are, who are the executives, corporate scientists, the politicians, the lobbyists in various episodes around these toxic substances. But when I, as a human being, read these documents over and over again, I'm really not paying attention to the names, and the names tend to kind of be a big blur to me, an anonymous blur. And so what named entity extraction allows you to do is, on the fly, list the most commonly recurring names, organizations, and places. And so you see that output on your screen right here. I ran this tool on a crop of PCB documents, and at the very top on the left, you have a number of names that I've isolated, and one of them is a fellow by the name of Elmer Wheeler. Now, I had no idea who this guy was, even though I'd read so many documents so many times. His name, again, was just a blur. And so what I did was I took his name after the extractor had identified it. I popped it in to Toxic Docs, and I found, about 1,500 documents with his name on them. And I started reading them. And I learned he was a lead scientist within the medical division of Monsanto. And I discovered, as the controversy over PCBs began in the 1960s, he was the coordinator of the company's effort to try to control as much of the safety inquiry as possible. So just to take one example, this is a little extract from a memo he sent on impending regulation of PCBs. And I think the essence of that memo is captured rather succinctly in the passage here. Quote, "The general approach should be our continuous cooperation with these agencies and to answer their questions, but not offer a great deal of information or content." And you can read about the ways he did not offer a great deal of information or content by looking at the Elmer Wheeler documents. I'm also really excited about our network identifier. So this is kind of an extension of the named entity tool, but it uses co-locations on documents to infer possible network relationships between people. And so to use this Monsanto example again, if you find Elmer Wheeler talking a lot to a fellow named Otis Fancher, you might guess that there might be a trail of correspondence to read and search through. We've also more recently actually changed to Google's TensorBoard network visualizer, which models every entity in a multidimensional space. And so here you see some examples of that too. So I'm very excited about some of these network analysis tools that are coming out. And then finally, we have a geography parser that a graduate student and I have been hacking away on. It basically lets you zoom in on a particular geographic region of the country where there are substantial numbers of documents. And I've talked a lot about things going on in boardrooms and scientific labs, but what about localities that bear the brunt of a lot of this toxicity? That's what this geography parser is going to be for. All right, in my final couple of minutes, I just want to turn away now from technology toys and talk a little bit about where this project is maybe going next. So one of the things we found pretty cool is the contacts we've made with local environmental justice organizations who have actually found useful artifacts on Toxic Docs that speak to some of their concerns. Again, particularly in local communities where they live, like they might find a document related to a town in Delaware or something like that. But these kinds of interactions have been mostly fleeting. They've been over social media, our Facebook page, on email. So one of the things we'd like to do more in the next few years is actually get toxic docs out of the domain of academic specialists only and into the broader, environmental justice community that is also interested in these issues. We have data that shows that your typical user of toxic docs actually does spend a lot of time on the site, something like 30 minutes. And that is both good news, but also not so good news. It's good because we know that, very serious hardcore researchers like Jessica are using it. And, these are usually people with very express and deliberate intentions about what they want to find. But we'd also like more casual users who are just interested in engaging with the site as well. We do have some blog entries that are designed to showcase some of the documents in a more accessible manner, but I think we can do a lot better job, again, of interfacing with both environmental justice groups and the broader public. And that could take a number of forms, ranging from public education and dissemination to maybe actually serving as a repository from for some of those organizations. So I'd actually love, if you're in the audience, to hear some suggestions about how we can make this less of a product only for specialists. So community engagement is one of our shortcomings, but I'm also excited about how we're expanding our purview. So Toxic Docs, along with EDGI, Jessica's group, has started a Freedom of Information Act project. So Freedom of Information Act is a law that allows you to demand from various public agencies documents about their operations. And our FOIA project is actually inspired, at least in part, by some folks at GW who do this all day for foreign policy. They write FOIA requests to the Department of Defense and the State Department and other agencies. We actually know a lot about American foreign policy, including some very, very unsavory things because of this project. And so one of the things we're doing is filing more of these with the EPA and pairing up with EDGI for a kind of companion site to Toxic Docs. And you can actually go to it right now. It's called, I'll post it in the chat after here, but it's called edgyfoia.toxicdocs.org. We're also very excited about building towards Toxic Docs 3.0. A lot of the technology that I've showed here, whether it's harnessing the power of parallel computing or novel databases or novel tools that pry out patterns in text, it's cool stuff. But I think in 5 years, maybe even fewer years than that, it's going to look like the dark ages. There are a lot of really interesting things going on in natural language processing and AI and text analysis. A lot of it kind of scary, some of it certainly overhyped, but a lot of interesting tools that we've been kind of dipping our toes into. So this is a natural language processing model that is able to explain the logic of a joke. You may have seen this Dolly engine, which has gotten some media attention, mostly for frivolous stuff, which is drawing, silly pictures of stuff like an astronaut on a horse. But, we do think it can actually be leveraged for something perhaps more productive than that. And this is GPT-3, OpenAI's, the company OpenAI's model, which, and here is it writing an article in fairly intelligible prose. We've been playing around with this too to see if we can actually do document summaries automatically. So a lot of cool stuff on the horizon in this world. And that's pretty much all I got. I'm looking forward to the conversation with Jessica and all of you who attended. Thank you.
Excellent. Great. Super. Thank you so much. Now for the discussion part. I'm going to switch to using your first names. Thank you both for your presentations. I'll give you each a chance to say something to the other, or that can be as structured or unstructured as you like. But starting with Jessica, if you've got any question or comment for Merlin.
Yeah, absolutely. Merlin, I have a big question actually that is something that comes up very often in a good way. So these documents can tell really strong, powerful stories for communities and people beyond, and they're meant as general knowledge. but how sometimes they can also do bad things. So the question is like, if you're the question is about creating a public archive that can be used for really good and for really bad. And I just, it's always a question of mine too, is how to prevent, I mean, there's no way to prevent, but like the anxiety in some of this information being used for attacks on even researchers. I know that, you know, there's been folks in the industrial transparency world that have been, especially Chevron, et cetera, that are, you know, being attacked. Like, how to keep this in a space that's really positive. It's just it's more of like a metaphysical, larger question, but something that's really tough when thinking about this.
Yeah, no, we thought about that a lot. And I'll actually I'll give both a general answer and a concrete example that we've been sort of debating over this. So in terms of like the damage and harm that could be caused by our documents, I think we have a light, you know, to borrow Phil's phrase from the top of this conversation, we have a light touch when it comes to curatorial activity. We don't just mindlessly plop up everything that we get, you know, we clean it up, but we are very careful not to just pick certain kinds of documents that conform to a certain narrative. And partly that's because of credibility reasons. I don't want somebody, whatever their ideological persuasion, whether they're an academic or they work for a corporation or something, to claim that we cherry pick stuff and only put up certain kinds of documents that make Chevron look bad. So one of the problems with that is, you know, sometimes there might be material up there that if it's decontextualized or somebody only wants to pick one or two things, it can be misrepresented. So here's an example of that. The American Petroleum Institute is a trade association for the oil and gas industry. And mostly it has been involved in things I think a lot of us would find pretty lamentable and bad. You know, it's fought air pollution regulations. It's been a leading force for climate denialism, or at least downplaying the effects of climate change. But occasionally they did fund air pollution research that was actually pretty serious and above board, at least as far as I can tell. I was pretty surprised by that. So I could easily see the API taking little bits and pieces from our database and saying, actually, they've been, you know, great on air pollution research. And I think ultimately, when I weigh the cost of, you know, the kind of credibility, potential credibility costs and accusations that might arise from our deliberate paring down of the collection to something like that, it's worth, you know, it's worth it. I think in even an old school archive, you can do that. Like I can go to the New York Public Library and pick out, you know, if I'm a kind of dishonest type sort of person, I can pick out two or three things that make people look a certain way without canvassing the entire collection. Here's to the other question about, or here's another specific question I think partially addresses another concern. So, although it's slightly different, but tell me if this is what you were getting at. So there are lots of people with fancy credentials behind their names and sometimes institutional affiliations, including with universities, who for decades have been moonlighting for the industry. They've been writing reports claiming that low doses of lead or asbestos are in fact not harmful. They give expert testimony in a number of these cases, including cases where they actually have no subject matter expertise. They're just looking for somebody with a PhD in some kind of laboratory science to say what they want. And we have depositions of a lot of these figures. We have not put those depositions online yet because we are not quite sure. I don't want to be sensationalist about it. I do think that it is very important for people who do that kind of activity to be accountable for it and that there be a record that they did such a thing, but I'm not 100% sure yet how we present it without doing so in a sensationalistic, scandal kind of way. Because ultimately, I think we don't want people to understand this as just bad apples doing bad things. We want them to understand that actually there is a system that has incentivized some people to use their credentials in this kind of way. So you raise a lot of interesting questions that I think when we started this project, we didn't really anticipate, but they're interesting, questions about the ethics of document preservation and public accessibility that, I think you don't really think about until you encounter them.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's it. Okay. Merlin, you have a question for Jessica? Pick that up.
I do. I had a question about really not just People's EPA, but EDGI's work also. And it's about sustainability of these projects. I certainly think during the Trump administration, when they were taking a machete to various important components of the EPA, including data that the EPA collects, you could understand why there would be a lot of philanthropic and even other kinds of federal agency support for a project like EDGI. But as we all know in the academic space, things wax and wane in terms of interest levels. And so I've thought about this for a long time, is what is the plan for kind of making sure that the important information gets preserved and protected, even when the whims of philanthropists and funding agencies decide to go chase some new shiny object. And it's a challenge for us, and I imagine it's a challenge for EDGI too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I won't speak to we have different mechanisms and different partnerships that we're working with to make sure that it's sustainable, meaning the information and the data that's culled online, to different servers, et cetera. But thinking about the sustainability of a larger conversation, something that is essentially creating, so websites are pretty, I'm sure, as you know, require a lot of maintenance over time, and for things to actually grow over time also duly, as I'm working with a network of volunteers, but also in the nonprofit space funding, it is of course incredibly difficult to maintain that sort of fever and excitement constantly that you really need to keep these projects growing, keep them tweeting, keep things interesting. Even just a tracker in APE, which is looking at news sources every week, takes a considerable amount of time to cull them, digest them, mark them, tweet about them, and make sure that everybody knows about them. But I think, I'll respond to how we're doing this work. There's many of folks at EDGI who are constantly fundraising and working with different foundations. We are grant writing as, academics and institutional folks to keep a long-term vision, but also just literally keeping the lights on by keeping servers, keeping a People's EPA, or keeping EDGI's server going in perpetuity is a task at hand. And I think that, fundamentally, what's really making it all work are the folks behind it. And working, I'm sure you feel the same, working collectively with folks is the most exciting part about EDGI and a People's EPA, is working with people I'm technically a trained architectural historian who also, works in history of technology and building materials. So I have that expertise, but being able to work with data analysts, scientists, public historians, environmental historians, scientists, ex-EPA officials, with all the folks that really make you understand what environmental governance really means and how to contextualize it. That is what keeps it going. I really do think that the network idea of, make fun of Slack, if you will, but being able to reach across the aisle to so many folks in so many different ways has been, over the last 2 years in particular, has completely transformed my career and my way of thinking. And without the human power, I love AI and I love all the technologies presented, but like really having experts, and I think I see Ellen Spears is on, like having those folks who have done the work over so many years and having that expertise to really contextualize all this stuff and to move things forward, and who are passionate about advocating for this stuff, is the only engine that keeps things driving. So, I mean, that's not really the most astute answer to your question, but it's the people that get it going, and keep it
For
going.
sure. That's a great. I mean, when we say sustainability and things like that, usually the first thing one goes to is, you know, the dollars and cents, but it is also the community interest and people having a, you know, an emotional investment, for lack of a better phrase, in the project, to want to keep it going. Yeah.
That's a great transition to, we have one of the questions we asked is related to the question I wanted to ask you, which was, I was going to ask about sustainability also. Felicia Metz asks if you've considered any models for licensing, and are you committed to providing information free to all users all the time, or what? And I would add to that, I guess, one of the questions on sustainability is sustainability raises the question, when somebody is supporting the effort, then it raises the question of who owns it, who owns the data. And in the case here, we are at a library, who owns the metadata, whose responsibility is it to preserve not just the data, but the metadata, and provide access to it. And with that come questions of governance also. So if some institution or organization or private person or government agency provides you with the resources you need to operate, what does that do to the governance of your efforts, either of you? And I guess I would just I piggyback my question onto Felicia's question about the licensing. So either of you can take that. We'll start with you, Merlin, if you want.
Sure. Excellent questions by both Felicia and Phil. Felicia, the most direct answer to that is, so we have on the front page of our site, I hope I don't butcher the slogan to the site because I'm pretty sure I made it up, but it's something like open to all everywhere, or something like that. Free for all and open to all. I'm pretty sure it sounds more graceful than that. And that's that we've been pretty steadfast in that. We actually have gotten offers from places to package this into a proprietary thing that could then be sold to academic libraries. There are a number of data sets that libraries subscribe to, ranging from curated census data to 19th century newspapers and things like that. But we didn't want to do that. This is a project that is not supposed to, even though lots of academic researchers do use it, it is for the public interest, and most people in the public don't have access to the fancy databases that those of us in academic spaces take for granted. It poses some pretty interesting trade-offs, because doing a license deal like that would take care of a lot of the sustainability questions, but I think the cost of it would be quite severe in terms of access and open access, the purpose of this this event. To your other question, Phil, about if you're getting funding from the NSF or some philanthropy, what is the ownership question? We've probably taken a sort of naive approach to that, which is we'll cross that bridge if we ever get to it. We haven't crossed it yet, but we have done a couple of things to protect and insulate the site. So one is that we did not actually host it on a university platform for a variety of reasons. I mean, the university technology here was not great. So, but the second reason was that, if we get letters, semi-regularly from, say Monsanto or BP Oil or whatever, and they're called clawback letters. And they basically demand that some document be removed from our database. And it's almost always kind of a spurious reason. But every time this happens, we have to walk over to the university council's office and ask them, what should we do? Now, we've been kind of lucky. The university council that has been assigned to us is somebody who grew up in rural Louisiana and whose hometown was devastated by one of these companies. So she's been very sympathetic to us. But, you know, that's not, we may not always get a sympathetic university council. And there could be a time when they say, hey, you better shut this thing down. Oh, you're not going to do it? We'll do it for you. Click. So by at least having it on an autonomous cloud platform that we 100% control and nobody else, we can prevent that situation. The other thing we do is that, you know, let's say for some reason, you know, I walk across the street and God forbid get hit by a truck or something like that, or you know, and so do my collaborators. We actually have several copies of the database that are stored in both kind of an old school centralized manner and also a decentralized manner, so that you know the information can never fully disappear. And we have instructions on that certain people have on how to rescue the database if you know something like that were to happen.
Yeah, Jessica, say something.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I feel like our issue's a little less serious because we don't have a million industrial documents. But yeah, we just make sure that we always use open access platforms as much as possible. The tools that are developed in the Environmental Enforcement Watch, they're always using open access. And we in particular, as we develop the site, we're always making, hopefully there's also clear language and accessibility as much as possible, because things can get really in the weeds if you're not careful. Calling out as much as possible keywords, even administrator names, things that are laws and regulations that are quite difficult to understand. But that's a larger public accessibility. Like for us, it's more who is looking at the site, how are they using it, what are they getting from it, what are they learning? And we want really a spectrum to be able to learn. So the quick grab, meaning understand, oh, you know, the EPA is actually making sure that I have clean water in one way, shape, or form, or to even the nitty gritty, looking specifically at a specific region, a specific administrator in a specific time period, and they're looking at the Clean Water Act in this way. We would like it open and accessible to a broad number of citizens, people, researchers, journalists, and that's really what it's been used for in our background. And in terms of licensing, we're all academics, we're all pushing the midnight oil. So we're all dedicated so it's the people network. So it's true, if one of us gets hit by a bus, there might be a little bit of trouble. But we have a large network of folks that are always constantly there to pick it up. And our folks change quite often. You know, we have volunteer networks of students, of professors, of folks who are in the industry. So people come in and out, and the projects are maintained pretty steady momentum. So yeah, it just keeps it going until it doesn't, I guess.
Excellent. Great. Merlin, were you about to add something else on that, or no? Okay.
No, I was all done.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just reading the body language. Okay, great. Another question from MD Galvin. Are you getting any pushback on FOIA requests, for example, charges or other kind of bureaucratic resistance that you'd would like to mention?
Long term, just taking forever. And I mean, Merlin, you can also speak to this, I'm sure. Just timelines are just really extended. And that was before, but in COVID, it's gotten really a lot worse. Go ahead. I'm sure Merlin has more to say on that.
No, I mean, we're kind of learning a lot about FOIA. So this project the project, by the way, if you want to go to it, it's EDGI FOIA. So it's EDGI, the organization Jessica talked about, EDGI, FOIA.toxicdocs.org. So you just kind of stick, instead of where you would write www, you stick EDGI FOIA. But you know, we're kind of learning a lot about FOIA. So let me answer the question directly first, MD Galvin. Yes and no. So FOIA is weird in that I think a lot of it, not all of it, but a lot of it has to do with the person who reads the FOIA requests and, their proclivity or not to actually help people. So the first one we did was with the FDA over regulation of asbestos in a number of consumer products. And we were shocked that we got a lot of stuff back, in relatively quickly, although that is more an exception than the rule. But the rule is perhaps that it often matters what the agency is and their culture towards FOIA and how serious or not they take it. We've also had the bottlenecks that Jessica has mentioned too. We've teamed up with some very skilled people on the EDGI side who have a lot more experience writing these requests. I mean, you're legally entitled to write one in plain English, but there's a secret sauce, I think, that lawyers who have done this stuff a lot know the exact wording, how to be as precise as possible, how to anticipate potential reasons for denial. So we're learning a lot. But yeah, I think the picture Jessica paints is all too often the more typical one.
Excellent, thank you. Would either of you like to mention any successful or planned or unsuccessful experience with advertising, social media, or something to promote or increase awareness about your work?
I mean, I can talk a little bit about that in my end, and we have some great communications folks at EDGI, so it's not always my purview, but I get to check out the analytics. And what's fascinating, so we've published in Nature, Washington Post, New York Times, Verge, and beyond. But really, surprisingly enough, Twitter is such a good mechanism to get things out and getting hits or analytics, so engagements of 40,000 plus people. When you think about a typical academic paper, think about its reach, or even a book per se. 1,000 copies in a good, 1,000, 2,000 copies in a good book, 40,000 hits about a specific research piece is, it's a pretty good reach. And so looking at the analytics, for better or worse in the world, social media is a big helper about these projects. It's a great advertiser, and we haven't had too many issues where folks come to push back in really bad ways. We haven't had any bombed meetings or that sort of thing. I think we present ourselves as we're not a threat per se, and I'm sure others have had worse issues. But just consistently tweeting and having a great audience of folks who are really interested and engaged with how to make environmental data more transparent is one of the key secrets, I think. Not secrets, it's very public. Twitter is very public, but very helpful for EDGI and APE.
Excellent. Great. Merlin, you have a comment on that?
I have only, for the most part, lack of success in the social media department to report, and I think we could actually learn a lot more about how EDGI does it. It's as I think you both know, it can be very labor intensive, even though a tweet seems like a short little thing to post, to kind of do it, a couple times a day in a consistent way, as Jessica was saying. And, I think we focused a lot of our effort on just the technology stuff, but haven't focused enough on this community interfacing part, of which social media would be a part. So, we'd like to bring somebody on board who might be able to do that. It's also a generational thing, I think, for me at least. The platform du jour changes every year. now all my students, I mean, we probably know this teaching students, right? There's some new thing that they are mentioning every couple of years. If you say Facebook, they go, ew, right?
Twitter now
but,
is arcane. Everyone's doing
Twitter's become
TikToks.
arcane.
Like we have to learn how
TikTok,
to
right.
toxic docs
Yeah.
TikToks.
No, we have to dance in front of EPA oral histories and stuff. So so we're learning on that, and I think one of the things we like to do is bring in somebody younger who's a little bit more aware of these kinds of things. Yeah.
That's great. I'm curious about on the you both have projects that involve, sort of ongoing gathering of information, and just thinking back to the library context, it's sort of like the layers of information that are required to the information processing that's required to provide real access is underappreciated, not by you, but in general. And I think Merlin, your story about going from millions of bytes of characters to readable, usable information is a story of modern archives and libraries in general. But I think I think people don't really, a lot of people don't realize the amount of, the importance of making those decisions responsibly and in the public interest, the amount of resources it takes to process, preserve, disseminate, display, organize this large bodies, and especially ongoing bodies of information. And you're both, I think, working in spaces where you might sort of think, oh, it's out there. So of course, if you want to find depositions, you just search deposition and you just find the depositions. Or, EPA information, it's not like it's going to just disappear off a government website one day. But of course, I think we've all had our assumptions shaken in these areas in the last, since whatever WikiLeaks era or something, I guess. So could either of you or both of you say something about the expertise, resources, judgment, or something that's required to sort of to go from data to usable, or to make accessibility a real thing rather than just bytes on a computer? Either one, go first.
Yeah, I can take a stab at that. I mean, you raised, Phil, a kind of paradox, I guess, or which is that if you do a project like these two projects, if you get the user interface part and the infrastructural part right, it's like what you said. It doesn't. You shouldn't feel it, right? You shouldn't be able to see it. It's kind of like magic in a way. It's like a sleight of hand, and it just works. You type in deposition, and boom, you get some deposition. You type in this Monsanto guy, and boom, you get the stuff. But you're absolutely right that that ease masquerades a lot of the labor and experimentation that went through it. Because I could have given a very, I think now in retrospect, funny and comical presentation about all the dead ends and things that we tried that didn't work out before we got something that worked. I'll just give one that's very quick, that was very important to me from the start. A lot of document retrieval services, including some that we work with at universities, are just slow. And you type in a query and it will take 3 to 5 seconds for it to show up. And if you look at human-computer interaction research, the one kind of consensus that those folks have is that web users are extremely impatient. They do not want to sit around for, even 3 seconds to wait for something. And if you ask them to do that over and over again, 3 seconds, 3 seconds, 3 seconds, they tune out, or they just say that's a terrible, clunky site. So we actually spent something like 6 months just figuring out how to make sure that the query took like 0.01 seconds to load. But as you say, it's not something, we want to make it so that it feels like something you don't even realize that you take for granted. But the other part of it is that maybe people don't appreciate it as much. I don't know. I'll have. I'd rather have people not appreciate it than have a miserable web experience. So, but you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and from our end, just to add, I think so. EPA does have a public website, a public archive. You can go to the National Archives and look at things, but it's web governance, meaning what is accessible, when, and why it's not exactly the best system. It's not super clear. Its information data laws and regulations are, especially in the web sphere, are not they're not as good as they can be or should be. And so a People's EPA and EDGI in general has really been pushing back and advocating for better accessibility, making sure that the stuff is there. For example, and Ellen's, I think, in the call here, a bunch of environmental historians found out that the EPA was going to sunset its online archive. And it had been announced in July of this year, that it was going to happen in July of this year. We gathered folks from the association, the American Society of Environmental Historians, the history organizations. So over 100 wrote a letter to say, hey, this information is important for you, it's important for me, and it's important for all of us. And EPA did actually back out. And so it's going to be kept for another year, supposedly. So it's those moments of expertise to after you're actually watching the information, to not take for granted that it will always be there. In particular, in websites, the public accessibility information is quite unclear. So that's one aspect. Also with the Environmental Protection Agency, it's not always written in a narrative that folks can understand. So we really focus on telling stories of why it matters, and really contextualizing and critiquing any gaps in information. So you can, the EPA is really great about public releases. So this is the amazing thing that the EPA is doing, but understanding really the context behind it, how historically it's been different, how this might not be new, how it's part of a larger conversation, to have a network of environmental historians and advocates really behind the project to contextualize those moments and to be sort of at the ready, anything that happens, like when the EPA was going to sunset its online archive, you know, a gathering of folks and leaders really came right away, ready to say this information is really, really important. And so just a diversity of data and critiquing the gaps are what a People's EPA is really trying to do. And we're also not great at community outreach. That's something in our future that we're working on. Try to understand how, as I mentioned at the end, how the EPA touches the ground, how it affects my family in Nebraska, just as it affects your family in Texas and other folks in Alaska and beyond. And so really understanding how the EPA is part of our everyday lives and how we can push back if we need to is very important and part of our future, our questions and where we're going.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. Let me take just a minute for either of you if you want to make any closing remarks, and then we'll kick it back to Adrian for our wrap up. Merlin, want to go first? Anything you want to add or promote, mention?
Oh, I think Daniel said something.
Yeah, we do have one
now.
more question.
Oh, okay.
About the journalists, educators, watchdogs, any cases beyond research, any use cases beyond research, and how that might be associated or attract philanthropic support. Merlin, can you take that one?
Yeah, we certainly, academics are a big part of the users, but two others that have been kind of interesting are one that you mentioned, journalists. So several journalists have used the site to do some really interesting stories and sometimes uncover things that, you know, I didn't even know were there, and that's been cool. And the other community that's interesting is not one that is new to us, but it's been other kinds of plaintiff attorneys who find interesting things. Now, this is also something that presents some ethical issues too, because sometimes we will get a plaintiff's attorney and they will say, hey, can you point us to this or that? I generally actually say, no, you go do the work yourself, because like I don't want the site to be viewed as like, you know, this toady site that's it's just doing work, answering,
Intervene in legal cases.
yeah, interviewing and giving free consultations to, you know, plaintiffs firms. So yeah, but those have been two interesting kind of interactions, just to know that people are using it.
Yeah. What about you, Jessica? Any other use cases you could mention for us?
I would also say education beyond just the college level, science education at the high school level, learning that folks are high school and elementary school, I can only imagine, but really learning sophisticated stuff, thinking through, I think, the fact that things are more visual, timelines, and then they can actually look through documents, you know, physical archive documents that are uploaded, listen to interviews, can reach a wider variety of audiences, I think sometimes that always, so it's amazing to hear about how high school and even the upper level and elementary are using the work to learn about the EPA, because that's where it all starts. So such a treat always to get that.
That's a good one. And students will come up with uses you might not have anticipated for sure. Great. Okay, well, let me now let me use that as our last words and kick it to Adrian to wrap up for us.
Thank you so much, Philip, Merlin, and Jessica. Thank you so much. I learned a lot, and I sat here scheming to myself about how we in libraries in the library world could really make sure more and more people know about the resources that you have created. And then also to the some of the comments that were expressed are really that, you know, heartwarming and encouraging, that commitment to keeping things open, and how important that is to our lives to be informed about things that affect our lives and our environment, our climate, etc. And the work that you're doing hopefully adds to that whole mix that we all need to take part in. So thank you very much for your comments. I'd also, and thank you, Philip, too, for moderating. I'd like to thank again our co-sponsor, the School of Architecture, Preservation and Planning, and then people in the libraries, Judith Kidd, Melanie Carroll, who also helped with logistics today, and then thank all of you who are attending. We hope that this event was interesting and informative for you, and that we will see you at future events, hopefully in the future soon, but if not, at the next open access event that we hold. So thank you again, and I hope everybody has a great evening ahead.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you. This is really fun.
Thank you all.
It was great.
Thanks, and appreciation to our speakers. Thank you both. Great projects. Okay.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you. Have a nice evening.
Thanks all.